Welcome to History on Blast, Episode 1. What's that smell? If you were to walk through the north end of Boston, for the most part you're going to smell garlic and pizza. But sometimes when it's hot and humid, another smell emerges from the bricks of the city. What is that smell, you ask? Let me put it this way. This episode, we're putting molasses on blast. But first, this month in history. On May 29th, 1453, the Byzantine city of Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Empire under Mehmed II. This completed the slow and inexorable death of the Byzantine Empire, which really was just a bunch of Roman Empire fanboys, this time with 100% more Christianity. Then the Ottoman Empire decided they were the new Roman Empire. Naturally. Now, all of this Turkish aggression worried Pope Nicholas V, and he called a crusade, but no one actually showed up. And that is the story of how Istanbul was Constantinople. There's a song about it, you should. But anyway, about the fucking molasses. The year is 1919. And that's like basically the start of Prohibition. It's coming soon. Multiple states had already started. It wasn't an amendment yet, but multiple states had gone dry and things were really depressing. But in Boston, there was a really, really big 2.3 million gallon, in fact, tank of molasses owned by the Purity Distilling Company, which was a subsidiary of the United States Industrial Alcohol Company. Yes, you heard me, industrial alcohol, which means that this molasses, which even though it was destined to become alcohol, was not destined to become the fun kind. It was destined to become the industrial cleaner kind, the industrial lubrication kind, the not a fun Friday night kind. Now, what is molasses, you ask? Molasses, by definition, is a dark brown syrup resulting from refining sugarcane or sugar beets into sugar. It's a really tasty side product. It's also one of the main ingredients in, gingerbread cookies. So it's delicious. But back to why it's on blast. January 15th, 1919. The temperature was seasonably warm, let us say. For a January in Boston, it was a whole 40 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 4 degrees Celsius. Remember I mentioned that big tank of molasses? Well, that was at 529 Commercial Street. And on this day, the 15th of January, it exploded. Yeah, it exploded. It was 12:45 in the afternoon when a Boston police officer, Patrolman Frank McManus, saw the tank buckle and then violently explode, sending molasses up to 25 feet in the air, though some reports say 40 feet, which, holy shit, a 40-foot wave of molasses. It was moving at 35 miles an hour, according to estimations, which, again, to convert that into the kilometers per hour, that's 56-ish kilometers per hour. The wave of sticky sweet destruction proceeded to submerge 2 city blocks. It also pulled people and horses under because, like I said, this is pretty much the middle of the day. So people are out and about going about their lives. Among other things, the wave of molasses took out a 5-ton Mack truck. It actually threw that. And I want you to just think about that. Like a 5-ton, 18-wheeler Mack truck getting thrown through the air like a fucking cartoon. The molasses also proceeded to go into the harbor because Commercial Street is basically waterfront property. And the molasses took out one of the Boston fireboats, number 31 specifically, it was sunk by molasses. Now, the reason that we say that, or the reason we're pretty sure that the molasses got up to 40 feet is because it also managed to take out the train. Back then, Boston had what they called the L, because for some reason in Boston we keep shortening all of our public transit lines to a single letter. So back then we had the L and now we have the T. But anyway, so they had the L, which was the Boston Elevated Railway Company. Specifically, the Atlantic Avenue line ran through here, and it was, as advertised, an elevated railway. It got hit with the wave of molasses hard enough to take out the elevated tracks. There's actually an interesting anecdote that I found in a couple places, although I couldn't find any specific details on this, and I'm super bummed because I want to know more about this stone cold badass. According to reports, the train was actually running at the time, and the engineer operating the L either just managed to turn the train around or had to run to the complete other end of the train in order to turn it around. But either way, this guy, whoever he was a fucking lucky bastard who managed to not send a train careening off of a broken railway line. Now, fascinatingly, given that this whole scene was witnessed by a patrolman from Boston's finest, the police weren't actually the first ones to respond to the scene. It wasn't the fire department either. It wasn't the ambulance corps. No! It was 116 cadets from the USS Nantucket, which happened to be stationed in the harbor at the time. They were students from the then Massachusetts Nautical School, now known as Mass Maritime. They actually helped a lot with rescue efforts and cleanup. Now for some basic statistics. What kind of damage does 2.3 million gallons of molasses wrought upon a city? 21 people were killed. 150 were injured. There are no estimates for how many horses were killed during this. And remember, this is before cars were common, so most of the transportation in the city would have been horse-based, so there were a lot of horses there that day. It took 6 months for Boston Harbor to no longer be brown from the sheer amount of molasses that was in it, which is disgusting. This also led to 5 years of lawsuits against the company that owned the tank. So, what caused this sticky situation? There are a few theories, but there's only one truth. The theories at the time, Italian anarchists, which is wild. But part of the reason that they believed that is because at the time the North End, which we think of the North End now and we're like, oh, pizza, pasta, it's super Italian. It's like the most Italian part of Boston. Back then, the North End was actually the Irish neighborhood. And they hadn't moved into Southie yet. And there were some pretty big divides between the Irish community and the Italian community of Boston. If by, some pretty big divides we mean like mafia violence. So Italian anarchists blowing up a giant tank full of molasses and killing a whole bunch of people makes sense. But it's wrong. The other things that they were blaming were, of course, who else do we blame for anything around here? Communists! It wasn't the commies, let me tell you. But this was the height of the post-World War I Red Scare, before we get into that good old post-World War II Red Scare, now with, McCarthyism. But, whatever. So what really happened? The answer is hot molasses in a badly made tank. The inspections of the tank were actually pretty haphazard, and people knew that. The molasses tank was actually really well known for the fact that it was leaking, and residents of the neighborhood were known to put buckets and jars around the tank to collect molasses because they could just get free molasses, which is amazing. And nobody said anything. The company actually had painted the outside of the tank brown to try to hide the leaks. The tank itself was made out of a low manganese content steel, which at the time was industrial standard. But since then, we've realized that it can't actually handle that kind of pressure. Where else have we seen low manganese steel? Well, this little incident that happened in the North Atlantic that we like to call the Titanic. As to what else happened, there was actually a pretty rapid temperature change. Over the course of a couple days, the temperature went from below freezing to 40 degrees, which heated up the molasses, but not enough that it was running. You know, it wasn't really a liquid. It was still fairly sticky. It was cool, not hot. So what we get is a pressurized tank made of a low-grade steel that buckles and then explodes due to the pressure, and then 2.3 million gallons of sticky molasses that is just thick enough for you to get stuck in and not thin enough for you to get back out of, filling 2 city blocks. And that is the disaster of Boston history known as the Great Molasses Flood. If you like what you're hearing, make sure that you subscribe and also leave us a rating and a review on iTunes. That would be awesome. If you would like to follow us on social media, you can find History on Blast over on Twitter. You can also get in contact with me through email at historyonblast@gmail.com. I would also like to thank Against the Mall for the use of their song Keepers of History for the intro and outro of our program. Thank you.